Bonjour, bienvenue, and welcome to today's weekly research conference. And just a few logistics before we introduce our esteemed speaker invited by our trainee committee. And so please pose your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, even during the progress of the presentation. And we'll endeavor to answer them in turn at the end of the lecture. But we're also accepting live questions at the end of the presentation as well. So please use a hands up feature on the bottom of your screen, and we'll be able to invite you to join the panel. And the panel will be chaired by Amy Johnston, and we're absolutely delighted on that. And also use the chat feature if you have any technical difficulties, and Kelsey will help you to make sure that you can join us successfully. And so we're absolutely thrilled today. We have an expert like Professor Michelle Laurence to join us today. And as people may know that we at the Hart Institute, but also the entire research community, very actively refining our strategy on equity, diversity, inclusion, or EDI for our institute and regionally. And but we are also very much mindful of its successful implementation. And Amy Johnston, who's our indefatigable champion for EDI, our trainee committee, is a true leader of innovation. And so we are always following Amy, and I follow her as well because she's my Twitter buddy. And Michelle Laurence is the educational development and digital learning specialist here at the University of Ottawa, and is also a member of Ottawa's Teaching and Learning Support Service Unit. Michelle originally studied kinesiology right here at the University of Ottawa and has subsequently obtained a Bachelor of Education from Western University and also MSc in Human Kinetics. And after a significant career in post-secondary teaching, both in the classroom, in the laboratory, and she's now at the front and center of this new era of post-pandemic educational development. She enjoys very much as a new role teaching the teachers how to incorporate new approaches given the current challenges, particularly in terms of digital presentations. With an extensive background in education, kinesiology, and many hours teaching in front of a classroom and also with the students, there's no one better suited to give us a talk today on accessible presentation. So thank you so much, and please join me to welcome Michelle Laurence on this most interesting presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. So let me share my screen with you and do a little bit of housekeeping. Okay, so thank you for that introduction. That was wonderful. You are stealing a bit of thunder from my first slide, though. So yes, I'm Michelle Laurence from the Teaching and Learning Support Services at the University of Ottawa, and my title is an Educational Developer and Digital Learning Specialist. So teaching teachers to teach is essentially my role here at the University of Ottawa. And yes, I have been in that role since March 2020, a familiar date to many of us, which is about the same age and circa of my Bitmoji here. Shorter hair, no glasses, less gray hair than today. So yes, 15 years post-secondary teaching, again, in the classroom and in the laboratory. And I've really been a world excitement for me to be in front of a classroom, but now in front of a screen, which is also a great place. And yes, I'm a retired kinesiologist, also a pandemic consequence. But I'm really loving this role of educational development, especially when we can bring some digital tools to our classroom. And we have my pup, Loki, poking in there to say hello and make sure things go well for me today. Thank you, Loki. Couple thank yous to start with before we jump into the presentation. First of all, just to thank a colleague of mine at the TLSS, Jean-Pascal Baudouin, for sharing his information and mentoring me in this process. Amy Johnson for the invitation today. Thank you so much. Again, thank you to the team at the TLSS for their support. And of course, for the warm welcome here at the University of Ottawa Hart Institute. Thank you very much. So again, a little hello from Loki and his little brother, Kona, saying good morning. So the hope for this webinar today, and the hope for me as I share this information, is at the end of this webinar, you will be prepared to use some of this content in your next presentation. And in that next presentation, you will include strategies and tools to increase the accessibility of your presentations. We'll talk briefly about the tools in PowerPoint, specifically the Check Accessibility tool, and hopefully be able to leverage that in your future presentations. And in your next presentation, you'll facilitate your meetings with accessibility in mind. You may be noticing, first of all, that there is some transcript or some closed captioning appearing in French today. As I am presenting in English, there is the French transcript appearing for you. So that is one little thing we can do to improve accessibility. How are we going to get to achieving those outcomes? We will do so by, first, we're going to define accessibility. And then the meat of the presentation, we'll spend our time talking about designing and delivering accessible materials. We'll start by talking about setting the climate of your presentation and what features of PowerPoint do we need to address and deal with and manage as we prepare a presentation. And then finally, we'll close with some facilitation techniques and some strategies to think about when you are facilitating and disseminating via a presentation. And we'll wrap up with some resources and take a summary of our talk. So we will have some interactive pieces today. So if you do have another screen available, another device available, a tablet or a phone, please log into WooClap.com. So it's just a web page. I can also put it in the chat quickly. Whoopsies. What's happening there? WooClap.com, and it's UOCI en français, Université Ottawa. Oops, I guess it should be Institute of Cardiology, Cardiac Institute. Sorry, I got your name wrong today. My apologies. UOCI, so at the top of the WooClap page, or grab this QR code, and we'll have a few interactive questions throughout the session today. So we'll be coming back to this link. So keep that tablet, phone, or page open and handy, and we'll actually give a quick test to it right now. If you would please let me know who is here today. What is your role at the Heart Institute, not the Cardiac Institute? My apologies. We have some postdocs. Wonderful. So this is a word cloud. So this is a way to kind of feature the answers in a way that as, say we get a couple of similar answers, or maybe we have a few, say postdocs in, the word postdoc would appear larger. So imaging scientists, postdoc, community communications specialists, faculty member at the University of Ottawa, PhD candidate. So all kinds of folks in our audience today in terms of their roles. We know what they do. I might even know some names, but I don't know what their needs are in terms of accessibility. And this is not something we need to ask necessarily individually of the person, but it's something we can anticipate. So really to make our presentations accessible and not have to be individually addressing needs. So really making it a universal access. That's where we're going to start next, is with defining accessibility. So accessibility is the removal of barriers to increase access to information in order to improve understanding and performance. So I've read that right off the slide. If you wanted to make that even shorter, accessibility is removal of barriers. Short and sweet. Dr. Thomas Tobin, a universal design for learning expert, would ask you to think about how your audience is accessing your information, how they're accessing your materials that you're offering, whether it's slides, videos, audio, and he would encourage you to remove one barrier by adding one access point. And that's what he calls the +1 approach. So it shouldn't be too overwhelming trying to add accessibility to our presentations. It should just be one more thing, just to start. And that could be simply the modality the presentation is offered in. So today I'm on video, but we have some closed captionings and actual translation offered today. I have a slideshow, but typically I would offer the slideshow ahead of time, or at least an outline, which you did receive with the invitation to this webinar. So we have two modalities. We have multiple ways we can share the information, and that is accessibility. So making sure we're able to reach as many members of our audience as possible by removing barriers. So barriers to visual information, barriers to auditory information, and making sure that is quite accessible. So for example, today, I have a list of who is here in terms of the roles they play, but I don't know if they're watching the Zoom meeting or maybe they're just listening to it on audio. So you have to be mindful of that and consider that an equivalence perhaps, or something, perhaps not equivalence, pardon me, but maybe a similarity to someone who might have a visual impairment. So they're not seeing the slides, but they're listening in. So maybe contextualize the why we need accessibility in that fashion. So up on the screen, we have this image that I feel we've seen a few times. So it's the image of three people of different heights watching a soccer game over a solid panel fence. This image is often used to depict systemic barriers. However, we're going to borrow it today to talk about a visual example of how we can access information. So let's say that instead of trying to watch the soccer game, they're simply trying to access the information from this presentation. So the first image, we see everyone is standing on a box of the same size, and that is equality. So equality is represented, again, everyone's standing on the same size of box, but still some of them still cannot see over the fence. So equality is represented by each person, again, same size of fence box, but still can't see over the fence. So this assumes that everyone will benefit from the same supports. This is equal treatment. So in the case of access to information, you all get my PowerPoint today. You can all view my PowerPoint today, but for some, that's not enough support to access the information. The second image refers to equity. So equity is represented here in this image by the shorter person getting a taller box, other people getting a box or not, to help them access information. So it allows them to get what they need. So equity is an accommodation that is tailored to the person's individual needs. So in terms of access to a presentation, it might be something like I mentioned earlier, sending the PowerPoint ahead of time so that person who has a visual impairment can view it ahead of time with their any technologies they might need. For someone who is neurodiversive, they might need to take some time to chunk and package it in a way that they'll be able to follow for the live presentation. So that is a sample of equity. Ideally, we want justice. We want it to be fair for everyone. And in a systemic barrier example, we talk about removing that barrier or adjusting it so that everyone can have access. So now we've gone from a solid fence and looking out onto the soccer game to a chain link fence. So you can see through it, those can see over it, and some can, as I said, see through it. So in the case of accessing information of a presentation, I will have provided the presentation ahead of time. I will have conducted the accessibility check, and we'll talk about that a bit. I've offered closed captions, transcripts will be shared. So offering many ways to access the information makes it more just for members of your audience. So the next part of the presentation will be to speak about the climate of the presentation. So now we're getting into the feature of the presentation where we're talking about designing accessible material. We're going to start about setting this climate. So what is the climate? And I suspect you might know what I'm talking about. So it's that feeling you get when you enter a presentation and you're wondering where it's going. Do I understand where I'm at in the presentation? and you get a sense of how welcoming it is. And if it's not welcoming, it's not likely to be accommodating. The audience is not likely to ask for accommodation, and then we've really lost an opportunity to improve accessibility for our audience. So how can we make that climate more welcoming? Dr. Liu made a perfect example of how to do that, right? So it's through addressing our participants upon arrival, test our technology even around our participants, really make us human, that we can have some issues here and there, and to add a personal touch, to let our audience know that who we are as individuals. So give a little introduction of ourselves, share something that you're of course comfortable with sharing with your audience, to give that personal touch that kind of opens the door, where you might get then an audience member say, oh, this person I think would really be okay with me asking for them to turn on closed captions. This person would be really okay if I ask them a question in the chat, or if we're in person, can I interrupt you to clarify something, for example. Back to a WooClap. Can you think of that one action you could take to improve the climate of your next presentation? Sometimes this one action can make us feel a little uncomfortable. We kind of have to step out of our comfort zone, but can we think of anything? See if my WooClap is working. I'm doing a tech check right now. There we go. Yeah, so making it more interactive in a presentation format might allow some interaction, hand raising, questions to be asked. Tell a story. That is a very, very popular strategy to help the audience identify with what you're trying to tell. Yeah, definitely. So sharing some material ahead of time helps your audience to anticipate even where they might get tripped up, and then they can prepare some questions to ask you before the class or the presentation starts. A fun game. That is a great skill to have, a game in your pocket at all times. Coming from the kinesiology world, although I spent more time on the science side than in the gym side, having a game is a really good idea. Great, thank you for your answers there. So continuing on designing accessible material, now we're really going to dig into the meat of the presentation, where we'll focus on the nitty-gritty of a PowerPoint presentation in particular. But before I jump into that, I'm going to put a pin in that for just a second. What I'd like you to think about, and what I'd like to ask, is what you plan on doing with that PowerPoint document. Do you plan on sharing the document with an audience before or after? If so, it's going to be of value to go through the accessibility checker in PowerPoint. We'll look at that in a moment. If you're not thinking you're going to share the PowerPoint PPT document per se, then you can probably offer an alternative. So a summary handout, perhaps where your key resources came from, some key findings, if you're presenting research, if you're able to share that at this point. So you can offer one or the other. Always ideally sharing something with your audience. You've been audience members before, you always want a takeaway of some kind. So all that to say that as we go through the accessibility measures that we'll discuss, some are going to be relevant to sharing your PowerPoint presentation as a document in and of itself in its PPT format, and others will be more relevant for presentation delivery. So there is a distinction there, and I'll try my best, if I don't get too stuck in my ways on presenting the content here, to kind of highlight things you might need to do for a PowerPoint presentation document sharing, and an alternative you could use. So, of the PowerPoint specific strategies to use for accessibility, using the slides layouts is probably one of the more simple features to use. As you likely know, PowerPoint contains a collection of preset accessible slide layouts. And especially in order to maximize how a screen reader would use those layouts, we need to leverage and use the content placeholders. So the screen reader will read those pieces first ahead of other content on the slide. Secondly, you want to also use new slides instead of changing layouts within a slide to, again, ensure that the screen reader follows the order properly. Note, you can, using the check accessibility tool, change the order that the screen reader can access the content, but using the content hold placeholders and the new slides or layouts functions is simple for the presentation producer to use. So quickly, where do we find that? In the home ribbon, you'll access the new slides tool, and as you've seen before, there are multiple different types of layouts where a title is featured and then the content images are featured. You can have the same type of layout with them side by side, so on and so forth. So using the content placeholders and using the layouts is a preferable approach to ensure that the screen reader specifically will capture that information and it will be read to the reader. Other specific strategies for accessibility in PowerPoint and some other design strategies are things like animation. Animation is not necessarily to avoid completely. However, you probably would want to avoid dramatic transitions, pulsing, flashing animations. You've probably experienced those and know these things are difficult to read. A second feature in our table here of presentation features is the color palette. Probably second to the screen reader, I would think is probably one of the bigger pieces we want to address. So avoiding red and green texts, as those are the more common color blindness issues, would be being able to view those two colors. And to not rely on colors as our only tool to distinguish an important fact or feature. Using bold, underline, size effect, using icons is very common nowadays to express an importance of content. There's a minimum that's recommended in the literature. Personally, I would go up another 6 points for both. So up to 24 points at a minimum, and bolded would be up to 20 points at a minimum, where you have a ratio of about 3 to 1 for the contrast of the font. Font types. So using sans serif font types are very much more clear to view on a screen. So Arial, Calibri, sans serif or comic, which many people, especially in academia, we poo-poo using the comic font type, but it's very, very accommodating, specifically for dyslexic readers, that we use sans serifs, and specifically the Comic Sans is very, very popular anecdotally. And of course, when we're using any type of multimedia, to make sure we're using and offering captioning and any transcripts that we can offer post presentation as well. All right, WooClapping once again. So my question here is, of the font and color combinations, which one do you prefer? Which one is more comfortable or easiest to read? So to answer and participate in this WooClap, you just need to click in the region of the font type that you like, or the color type that you like. I'm going to see if mine is working. Oh, that's my favorite too. The white text in the black box. Yeah, and of course larger font, very preferable. Oops, my apologies. I want you to keep answering. There we go. What? No one is picking yellow on white? That one hurts. So it's pretty clear that there are preferred, whether you have an impaired vision or not. There's just something about certain comfort about various combinations that make it more clear to read. Great, thank you for your answers. So another strategy in PowerPoint is using the slide design tool or tab. So again, you've probably seen this. So it's one of the tabs in the ribbon for PowerPoint where you'll have a selection of different design types. There's access to different design options. There's a menu available there. And this is where you can also choose your colors and your font. And of course, managing those in your master slide is a good idea. That way you don't have to adjust them for every slide where you want to specify and maintain that sans serif font, for example, or maintain that color palette. And a really neat tool that I will share in the chat is this contrast checker. So you can go into the contrast checker, pull in your colors and the background you'd like to check it against, and the checker tells you kind of thumbs up or thumbs down. I think it's green and red, or X's and check marks, to say whether your color selections are accessible or not. There's some of our platforms we use. For example, at the university, we use Brightspace. Brightspace has a built-in checker as well in terms of colors and sufficient contrast. Sure, there's a tool for you to try out to see if your color contrast is sufficient. And finally, on some specific PowerPoint strategies for accessibility. So if you are sharing your PowerPoint as a document, as a PPT, you're going to need to add alt text to the images. So simply, if it's only decorative, as many of the images so far in my presentation have been decorative, I can simply say alt text decorative in my images. If you're using from the stock images that are available in PowerPoint, if you're bringing those into your presentation, they automatically bring with them the alt text. So it'll be a description, or you can also decide whether you just want it to be described as decorative. When you're posting links in your PowerPoint presentation, again, this is if you're sharing the PowerPoint as a PPT, to make sure it's a meaningful link. So it's not just the URL is appearing. So give the title perhaps of where that page, that link will take you to, or using the click here or use this link and hyperlinking that information. That is also an accessible kind of protocol. It's kind of customary now to, when we see the bolded hyperlinked information, we know it's a link. And if you are going to share your PowerPoint presentation, but you're not going to necessarily share it as a presentation, as a PPT, the best alternative format would be to share it as a PDF, but a searchable PDF. So that really offers a lot of accessibility to your audience that's going to try and navigate the slideshow in a PDF format. So on to this accessibility checker. We could spend a whole hour just digging into the accessibility checker, especially if you're not familiar with it. So it's a tool that's built into Brightspace and to PowerPoint and to many of the Microsoft tools. So again, it's available from the ribbon at the top of the PowerPoint screen under Review, and you click on the Check Accessibility tool button. And what you'll see is this menu that appears where we can find 4 options. One is check accessibility. And what appears there are the 3 following options, which are to verify all the images in your presentation that have that need alt text attached to them, as well as verifying the reading order of the placeholders that are on your slide. So if you have added a placeholder or you've added a text box, for example, which we try to avoid, but if you're going to do so, make sure again, if you're sharing it as a PowerPoint presentation, that the reading order is correct. Best practice is always to list the slide number as the first reading item to orient your reader as they're going through the slide checker. And if they're going back and forth in the document, it's easier for them to get that message first as they're arriving onto that slide, that they're on slide 2. Or also another strategy is to make sure your slides have different titles. That way we don't have repeating titles and your reader is trying to find the slide where you talked about the accessibility tool and your 5 slides are named accessibility tool. That they're at least somewhat different so that your reader can find them. So either putting the slide number first or having different titles is a strategy for making sure the screen reader catches the right slide. And then the final button that you would find in your accessibility check is some options, some other few things. It's not a robust part of the tool, but there's some other options that you can look at to make your presentation, your document more accessible. All right, WooClapping yet again. So we've talked about a few of those PowerPoint design elements. Which one do you feel, and there's no right or wrong answer, just to kind of get a sense of how people are working with their PowerPoints, which one do you feel is most important to make your PowerPoint more accessible? So much like the last image, just click on the area that addresses your preference best. So to summarize the strategies for PowerPoint, you could use the slides, the layout, consider and manage animation, color, font type, font size, how you use multimedia, your slide design to make sure it's accessible, using alt text, meaningful links, and whoever chose the accessibility checker, we have a couple of folks who chose the accessibility checker. It kind of manages all of those things for us. It is a bit of there's a bit of a learning curve in learning how to maximize the accessibility checker. However, it's time well spent, even just to open your eyes, to do it once for a presentation, and just to see what it truly does mean in terms of bringing your presentation to the level of the accessibility checker. Thank you for your participation. And the last part of this chat today will be delivering accessible material are some facilitation strategies. So we've done all of these things for our presentation already. Your presentation is ready. You've created a welcoming climate. You've done the accessibility check in your presentation. If you're doing a video conference of your presentation, we've turned on captioning. Transcripts will be available. Slide translations in Teams, it's quite simple to do. And maybe if I get a moment, I'll try and show you how we do it in PowerPoint via Zoom. What else can we do to make the dissemination, the facilitation of this presentation more accessible? So I might start with proposing, and I feel like this group has this on their radar already, but collectively as a group that meets regularly, we might want to set some rules of engagement for how we want to continue to make our meetings, our presentations, our rounds, our conferences accessible. So to have an open dialogue and to kind of outline what we want to see consistently in our meetings. So that might involve, deciding what's feasible. Maybe we need to assign some responsibilities and talk about what you need as a presenter because our presenter too might have some accommodations and accessibility needs, as well as our audience members. We might want to commit to using closed captions, to recording the presentations, which that's clearly an approach we've taken here, and transcripts. These become staples of our presentations. Some others might include things that your group is specific to your group or your meetings that you want to make part of your regular operations and your procedures. More facilitation strategies would, of course, if we were in person, would mean facing your audience when you're explaining especially difficult concepts. In our virtual world right now, that means having the camera on. In the classroom, the debate has been huge on cameras on, cameras off. So both for the student, should they have their cameras on when the professor is teaching, and even should the professor have their camera on when they're teaching. And there are a lot of controls, specifically in Zoom and in Teams, where you can kind of change your layout to see what you need to see. So if you need to see the slide deck, you can select that. You might not need to see the professor speaking, but if you automatically turn off your camera as the professor, or in this case as a presenter, you've already removed that option to your audience. So keeping your camera on as a presenter is key. It leaves that option there for your audience to choose to have it on or off. Some people may be relying on your expressions, your mouth movements to make connections with what you're saying. And even though there might be this cognitive bandwidth challenge for some, there are controls, and we can certainly educate on that, on how to view just the slide deck and not the video, for example. When we are presenting, and most of us who've been trained in presentations or scientific dissemination, you need to describe your axes when you're introducing a graph, but be mindful of how much information is on that graph as well. We're so very proud of our work. We want to show everyone everything we've done, but maybe design backwards and think about what is it I want to say, and then come back and think about what needs to be on that image or on that graph. But we are encouraging to describe what's on an image, what's on a graph, to help your audience follow along, and to recenter some of those audience members that may have attention challenges and need to get refocused, for example. And again, we want to communicate messages in multiple formats. So it's okay to repeat what's on the screen and say it again out loud. And essentially, we should, if it's on your slide, you should be reading it. And you're probably thinking, Michelle, do you want me to read everything that's on my slide? I do, but I don't want you to put everything you're going to say on your slide. So be mindful of what it is we're putting on our slides, because that we need to be, again, just and fair in what is presented visually and auditorily out loud, so that our audience is getting the same message, regardless of how they're consuming the information. And another, even more facilitation strategies, asking for feedback and adjusting. So this is more so feasible in maybe more of a teaching setting, I realize. Contextualize where we're at in the presentation, where we're at in the information that's being disseminated. When we're receiving questions, to summarize and reframe the content might help. Again, repeat the question from an audience member, summarize the answers so that not everyone may have understood what you understood from the question being asked. So, and these things take time, and sometimes we don't have the time, but doing our best to address and make sure our audience is understanding the communications that are being had. And again, keeping in mind whether it's a visual impairment, an auditory impairment, you have your full Zoom working or just the audio is working, you can only hear it over the phone. Keeping those situations in mind in terms of facilitating, always very helpful. So finally, I knew I was going to go slightly over, but I do have one more thing for you. So just some resources that will be shared post presentation. So a couple of references and resources that were involved in building this presentation. Again, the Universal Design for Learning and Dr. Tobin's approach, some steps on how to make your PowerPoint document more accessible. I'll share also the many Microsoft tools and their information to how to improve your presentation, whether it's PowerPoint, and some neat tips in Teams. I know the Heart Institute, you typically are using the Teams platform for meetings and so on. Lots of accessibility features in Teams, almost probably one of the better systems out there for accessibility and capturing and centralizing all that information. Very helpful for users. And some resources at the university, of course, so very teaching focused, some material on inclusive pedagogy from the Accessibility Hub. It will also be linked into the resource that I'll provide today. And of course, we have to wrap this up with one last WooClap. So 3 last brainstorming questions for you. One thing you learned that you didn't know earlier today. I'll ask you to enter some information there. Maybe I'll open up all 3 categories. The other will be one thing that you hope you'll take into your future presentations. And the last one is one thing you still are wondering about, that you still don't know about accessibility, that you might want to learn more about. So accessibility checker, avoid red and green, whoopsies. Oh goodness, getting excited here. Yes, so great. I'm glad that I've opened some eyes to the accessibility checker. Very, very wonderful and useful tool. And again, I probably would recommend just going through the exercise of doing it once completely for a presentation to really get a sense of how much is involved and what it is you need to be mindful of in your future presentation preparation. How about the one thing you will change for your next presentation? So use the design tools. Awesome. Send the presentation out ahead of time if possible. I know we're always working on stuff last minute. This presentation changed a lot from its original conception to today, but it can be useful, and at a minimum, providing an outline of what will be discussed is often a good approach. Yeah, checking the order for the reading, the screen reader is really, really key. Restating questions before we answer, great. And finally, what's the one thing you'd like to learn more about? This is a very selfish question. This is something that I need to dig into more to maybe supplement and add to this, this presentation. How to add auto captions to Zoom and public platform. Well, that's a good one. Yeah, when you have just the limited resource. Fun ways to make presentations interactive. So this tool I'm using today, WooClap, is a licensed tool that the University of Ottawa has purchased. Kahoot is very similar. If you want to make it, it's a little bit goofy, a little bit, it's very colorful. Zoom does have many more polling options than it did, a few months ago. You can do some different types of polling. I haven't had the time to dig into it too much as I was busy playing with WooClap, but there are more tools built into many of the platforms now. The French translator, yeah, maybe I'll take a minute, or maybe I'll create even a quick little video and show you all how to do that, and I'll put it in the document that I'll be sharing with you. Trying to see how to see the rest of those, but oh, there we go. How to create simultaneous transcripts and translations. Great. Yeah, so there's a lot of these things are built into most of the video conferencing tools. The translation while live is something in PowerPoint that when it opens a presentation, it's going to do the live transcription. So if we don't have time to show it today, maybe we'll talk about, I'll create a quick video to share with you all. And then I've popped into the slide a couple times already, but yes, thank you again for the invitation and for being, allowing me to be here today. So best way to reach me if you're looking for someone to chat about all these things, so is Laurence@uottawa.ca. There's my email. I'll put it again in the chat. And je parle français aussi, donc s'il y a des questions en français, je suis voulante de vous le communiquer en français.
Eh bien, merci beaucoup. That's really excellent. And so maybe I can ask Amy to chair the Q&A and pose questions and answers. Merci. Take care.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I learned a lot, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of excellent information in the resource documents that you're going to be circulating. So I'm really looking forward to those. So we do have one question in the Q&A box here, and welcome anyone to answer, or sorry, ask questions if they want as well. Just I believe we can do that, but I'll just read the first one here. If I were to use translation caption in a bilingual presentation, would it automatically switch the caption between languages? So that's the first question I see here.
So again, what I've done today is a feature in PowerPoint. And if I'm understanding the question correctly, say we're speaking in English and I want translation in French, or I could be speaking in French and translating. Oh, I think that's what they're getting at if I'm switching languages. It won't do that. It's not that savvy. So you probably would want to have the translation running in PowerPoint and then the closed captioning running in Zoom. So that's going to be the native language speaking. So that's going to be translated, say, in English, while the translation, so you're going to have like two appearing. You can turn it off and on if you're as an audience member on your Zoom panel, but it won't do the switch with just using the PowerPoint translation. You'll have to use closed captioning so it does capture the English.
Thanks so much. Oh, Dr. Liu has a question, and then I'll read the next one from the chat.
Well, I just want to follow up because it's really helpful in terms of the live captioning. Where is it located? I know you probably will send us some resources on that, but where is it located in the PowerPoint for that to happen? So as you are delivering your PowerPoint, and they will actually capture your voice and do the translation, but that's within the PowerPoint function itself. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. May I share my screen once more and I'll show you where?
Yeah, it'd be wonderful. Yeah, this is
okay.
So it's so useful.
Okay, here we go. So in the, whoops, nope. Oh, yes. Are you seeing my PowerPoint screen with my notes over here on the left? Yes, okay. Yes. So in the slideshow, in the ribbon, in the tab, I'm going to go to use subtitles and I'm going to turn that on. There's so many features that we ignore that we see day in, day out, and we're like, oh, I don't need that. We don't even know what it does. So you click use subtitles and then subtitle settings. So you can use that drop-down menu. And this is where the magic happens. So the spoken language is in English, but the subtitle language, whoops, right now it's saying it's also in English, but it can be in French. So then it should show the transcripts. And I believe it's only when I'm presenting. That's the trick, right? Because right now we're not presenting the slideshow. So you're not going to see that appear. So once I'm presenting, that's when the magic happens and you see the translation. So because it is very rigid, you're picking one spoken language and one translated language, it's not going to do the flip back and forth. So additionally in Zoom, you would have to run the closed captioning. So the live transcript is what it's called in Zoom. Now in Teams, if we were presenting in Teams, you see this feature where it says present in Teams. So if I did that, pretend I'm going to Teams, I'm not going to do that. On your side, on the audience member, you can choose the language that you will read the slides in. So the slide deck is translated in whichever language you choose among the choices that's available in the menu. So again, especially with University of Ottawa, Heart Institute, being bilingual institutions, you can always offer that second language with a combination. It's a little bit of massaging, maneuvering, and getting there, but the tools are there. They're not perfect. You're going to probably see some words that don't come out. As you know, the translation isn't perfect, but it's much, much better than it has been. So definitely improving. So yeah, that's a really handy feature in. So again, both of those functions are accessible from the slideshow tab in PowerPoint.
That's amazing. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to take notes here, but I know that your summary documents are going to be wonderful. We just had one more question here pop up. Can you show again where the Teams option appears in the PowerPoint?
Yep, so that's I'll share my screen once again. I love this. This is like teaching. It's so fun. So this is my PowerPoint. We're seeing the same images before. Is that right? Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So all of our functions are up here. So in the slideshow, you have that presented team. So right now I'm in the browser PowerPoint. It appears also. Let's see if it'll show up here if I open my in the presentation. So it's from the slideshow. I believe it even shows it from home. You can see it up here at the top right, present in Teams. So do the experiment with a colleague, present in Teams, and you'll see under the slideshow that's appearing on your Teams screen, you'll see the option. Again, it's a feature. It's always been there. We just ignore it. But you can select the language you want to see the slides appear in. So you're not going to hear the audio. You're not going to get an audio transcription, but the slides will be in French, or the slides will be in whichever language you speak outside of French or English, assuming it's in the menu options there.
Thanks so much. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so just on that, is there a way to, for example, I'm going to do the presentation, and let's say I prepare my slides in English, but I want to make sure that I have a French deck that can also go with it, to send out. So is there a way to get that translation? PowerPoint seems to do everything except cook your dinner. So is there something that PowerPoint can do on that?
Well, yes. So PowerPoint, much like Word, it can also translate the pair deck. That's another tool I use. the slide deck. Let me see if I can go to a slide that has some text on it. There we go. So again, in review now, so not in the slideshow tab, but under review, guess what? There's a translate feature. So again, right, they've always been there. Not always. This one is, well, it's been there for a while, but we can translate the slide deck. The problem becomes, I believe, it's a slide by slide. So it's work. So this is what you give to your children to translate yours. Somebody who's got lots of time on their hands, right, to translate for you. So it would do it that way. So I'm going to ask it to translate it from English and to French again, or again, any of the languages that appear here.
Oh, that's amazing. So okay, so you can't give the whole deck of, say, 20 slides and translate the whole deck. It will translate one slide at a time.
I believe so.
Okay, yeah, wow. Still, it's pretty amazing.
It's pretty good. We're catching up to Google. Google had this part of their tools from the very beginning, and they got that with the on us, like I'm from Microsoft or something. They got the head start on accessibility and making especially language accessibility part of the tool. Microsoft is right there now with a lot of their tools having the translate feature in there. So most of the time what we want is probably almost there. We just need to look for it.
So we just have a comment here thanking you for this presentation, and a few more coming in the chat here. We only have a couple minutes left, but I'm wondering, I saw the button there and I've heard of this feature in PowerPoint, but I've never used it. And I wonder if you could just talk about it if you have any experience with it. I'm sure you do. Just with regard to the practice presentation feature, it kind of reminds me of the accessibility checker. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I don't know it very well, unfortunately, Amy, but I don't mind the homework assignment. I don't mind digging in and figuring it out for you. It's part of my job. We can have a practice with the practice tool.
Yeah, I can also take a stab at it as well. I've always been interested. I think it might be helpful. I'm not sure what it does. Maybe it, obviously you could probably play back, speak and it would play it back, and maybe it gives you some different suggestions what you might do.
The coaching tool that, yeah, no, me too. I've thought the same thing. I'm like, oh, I should try this. I don't have time, but for Amy, I will make time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I know that the PowerPoint presentation, like when you are doing recording, because it's very useful, especially if you want to actually post some of these after your lecture, you can actually edit it. You can actually play, sort of a specific section. It's really actually amazingly flexible. Yeah, so you're right. It really has so many different mini tools embedded in there. Most of the time we just skip them. Yeah, and so this has been amazing. Yeah, so thank you so much. Yeah, so I think in terms of the practical information you provided is just being amazing. It's been we always assume that we know these things, but in fact there's way more that we don't know. Yeah, and this presentation is also most accessible as well. So this is a great illustration of practice of what we teach. And so this is just absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much, Michelle. And it's been a real privilege. And thank you, Amy, as well, for arranging this particular session, for all of us. And just keep in mind for the next meeting is March 28th. Garish Nair will actually talk on the topic of cardiac arrhythmias and in terms of looking at the various research strategies. So thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thanks to Michelle. And we'll follow up, with all the tips and the tools that she has recommended. And thanks again to Amy for arranging this. Yeah, take good care. Yeah, au revoir. Bye-bye.
Thank you.